right, Chris Mc Loone here with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. Welcome to this episode of the FAMA Forum. That's the Fire Apparatus Manufacturers Association Forum. Today we are going to be talking about engines. Engines, at least in the past 2 years, probably a little bit before that, have been a topic of conversation because of some changes that are coming along soon for the EPA. Some EPA guidelines for engines that we use all the time in our rigs are coming along. There have been a lot of questions along the way. All the questions don't have answers just yet, but we wanted to take the time today to provide as many answers to questions as we can. To that end, I've got Chris Crowel. He's the emergency vehicles lead for Cummins and part of FAMA. And of course, Jason Witmier, who we've had on a few times. He is the Director of Education and Technology for Safe Fleet. So, guys, thank you both for jumping in here today. We've got a lot of ground to cover. And like I said, hopefully we'll answer as many questions that are out there as possible. There are still a few that may remain, and of course we'll reconnect to provide that information when we have it. So welcome. Chris, I'm going to throw this first one over to you. And this is more not necessarily about what's going to happen to the engines, but more about what is causing these changes to be made. So could you just go over the EPA guidelines that are changing and what their impact will be on the engines that we use all the time?
It's a great question. We get that a lot. So today there's two separate standards, one for CARB, California Air Resources Board, and EPA. The good news is for 2027, both of those agencies have aligned on what those emission requirements are for 2027. This is really helpful to all of us. They include fire apparatus as they do today. So from 1988 until 2021, NOx regulations were reduced about 80%. Now engine manufacturers are challenged in meeting that another 80% in 4 years. So this drives me to an analogy with NASCAR. So we moved from 200 milligrams of NOx emissions to 35. That's a significant drop. So just as in NASCAR, getting that first mile an hour of track speed is expensive, but the second mile an hour is a lot more expensive. There's two other key points. The emissions component warranty, which covers many engine and chassis components, currently as it's written, could double from 5 years to 10 years. Engines must also meet the NOx requirements sooner, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the engine technology. And they also must meet all points within the engine operating range. So in the past, there was some averaging that was allowed, but now the engines have to meet it everywhere. Cummins is prepared to meet that challenge. So we've invested over $1 billion in research and development and another $1 billion in manufacturing capability to be able to produce this next generation of engines. Many ask, as I attend shows and talk with departments, should the EPA give the fire service a waiver for these emissions requirements? In fact, FAMA and the International Association of Fire Chiefs, Cummins, many other manufacturers work closely with them to get some level of relief for fire departments. So emissions equipment must remain in place, but there are no D rates for emissions related faults, nor is there an SCR inducement that would limit the engine to 5 miles per hour. For example, if you ran out of DEF. So that's sort of a high level of what these changes are.
Well, I'll tell you, the fact that you said there are two government agencies that are getting on board together so that, everything aligns is pretty much an achievement in and of itself. When you were just talking about the next generation of these engines, what are the major differences between what we've been putting in our rigs now and what will be coming down the pike. What is it that is what's causing the buzz with these engines that we know are going to impact things down the line? What are those major differences?
Sure. So as I mentioned, it's a pretty significant reduction, another 80% that we had to achieve over a 4-year design cycle. So Cummins will replace all of its current engines with new designs. So today that's the B6.7, L9, X12, and X15. The new engines will be a B7.2, so increased displacement, an X10, which the 10 is 10 liters. That will replace both our L9 and X12, and the next generation X15. So the biggest differences include within the after treatment system, there are now heaters. So I mentioned we have to meet emissions sooner after startup. So there will be heaters in front of the diesel particulate filter and also in front of the SCR catalysts. These heaters require a lot of energy. So we will add an additional 48 volt alternator on the engine that will be belt driven to generate that heat for the after treatment. We will also have 2 SCR catalysts in one can. So some people call it a snowman or infinity symbol, but 2 catalysts in the same can because we need that additional surface area to do that reaction. Because these are clean sheet designs, we have leveraged the design principles and CAD modeling that we did with the X12 engine that many are aware of. So using CAD, you can remove material where it's not needed. You can put additional material where it is needed so that you can reduce the overall system weight versus how we have traditionally designed the engines. This also allows us to do things like optimize coolant flow, optimize oil flow, mounting, how we mount components, etc. These designs will include dual overhead cam, and that allows us to have dedicated cam lobes for each one of the systems. We will also move to rear gear train. So today, gear trains are on the front of most of our engines. By moving them to the back, it allows us to create additional block stiffness, which is helpful, and it eliminates any kind of front engine oil leaks. As we've designed these, we know that fire truck tunnel or the engine compartment temperatures are critical. Fire trucks generate a lot, engines in a fire truck tunnel generate a lot of heat. We're doing things to create these engines with higher temperature components, including like the turbo actuator. It still is very important for departments to wait 3 to 5 minutes after operation to idle the engine to allow the turbo to cool down. And that applies even today with today's engines. That's the best thing you can do to improve turbo life. Cummins is also moving to canister style oil and fuel filters so that you just replace the element instead of the steel housing and the element, which we feel is more environmentally friendly.
You mentioned weight in there. Is there going to be any difference in weight? Because now we're going to start getting into how, these engines could impact some designs on the cabs and the chassis, and then we'll talk about the bodies as well. But will there be any weight differences that fire departments or apparatus manufacturers are going to have to be aware of as we spec out new rigs?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Because of these modeling techniques that we use with computer-aided design, we've been able to remove a lot of material. So the X15 will actually be weight neutral, meaning as a system, the new X15 with after treatment should be pretty similar to what the current X15 and after treatment system are. However, with the X10, it will be similar in weight to the X12 engine. Okay, so that's roughly 300 pounds more than the L9. The X12 was lighter than any other mid-bore engine in the market. So we felt that was a good target to go after.
And what about engine performance? That's got to be a question you get an awful lot as you make the rounds. Are there going to be differences in torque or horsepower?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So the X15 horsepower and torque ratings will largely remain the same. We'll still have a 605 1850 rating available. That's probably the most popular one in the fire service, and that's after any kind of engine parasitics. So I mentioned that 48-volt alternator. The engine's still going to have the same output to the transmission that it has today. The X10 ratings will cover all the previous L9 ratings, but we also added a high torque family. So today the L9 goes up to 450, 1250. But now with that higher torque family, it will go up to 1,650 foot-pounds. So if you think about the X12, that's only 50 foot-pounds short of where the X12 is today. We're also working closely with Allison so that we can look at some new control strategies that will allow us to optimize the performance of the X10. So things around dynamic torque controls, et cetera. So we feel like the X10 will be a valid replacement for the X12.
Jason, I wanted to bring you in a little bit now because I want to get into how these changes might impact cabs and chassis. So I guess just to get us started a little bit, what potential impacts could using new engines, the new EPA compliant engines, what impacts might they have on we'll start on the cab and chassis.
Sure. We'll start at the front of the vehicle. There's lots of things that come into play with this, obviously. And because we have so many different manufacturers out there, so many different OEMs that build their own cab and chassis, each one of them are going to be a little different. And unfortunately, we can't tell you here today, this is exactly what's going to happen with Pierce. This is exactly what's going to happen with E1. So we're going to speak in general a little bit. We're going to give you ideas on what to consider when you're talking to the person who's going to build your truck. They're going to know exactly what's going on because they're building that specific vehicle. First thing that came up was weight. Great news there. The weight really doesn't change all that much, and we're pretty much prepared for it. We are very weight sensitive on fire apparatus, as everyone knows, especially on that front steer axle, because that front steer axle doesn't go up nearly as high of a rating as the rear axle. The other thing to consider is, as much as we worry about overall weight, we worry about weight balance as well. So hearing that we're not going to see a huge impact from weight is really good news for the industry. The second part of it is the physical size, but it's not just the size of the engine. So Chris is talking about the footprint of the engine itself. The radiator plays in a lot for your OEM. So how big does that radiator have to be to keep that engine cooled? That can get into the doghouse or the engine tunnel, as we call it. When you get up into that engine tunnel, we're already at most apparatus are either a 96 or a 100-inch wide cab. By DOT standards, you can't go any wider than 102. There are some aerial bodies that are 102, so we really can't get a lot wider. We've also seen some changes over the past few years on NFPA code for the seat and how much space we need for that driver and officer. We start to factor all this stuff in together. We've got the seat getting a little wider. We've got the engine potentially getting a little bigger. We've got the radiator potentially getting a little bigger. It can all start to play in and affect things. The good news is, for the most part, it hasn't changed the overall design of that doghouse. That was critical because if we get into major changes on the doghouse, now we get into crash testing. And then we have to get these rigs crash tested again. We're all sensitive on price. We hear it all the time, how these fire apparatus keep increasing and increasing on cost. These are the kind of things you're looking at. Look at the investment that Chris just mentioned. $2 billion, I think it added up to, Chris. And that's just a rough estimate. I mean, I don't know if that takes into consideration everyone's time and labor and all. There's a lot that goes into this. There's a lot that goes into every one of these OEMs looking at that engine and that doghouse. So from what we've heard from most of our OEMs, they are doing some testing. I know we're going to touch on that at the end. But from most of the OEMs approach so far, they don't believe they're going to need to re-crash test these rigs, which is terrific because the crash testing is very expensive, very time consuming. That would push our lead times out even more. What we are going to look at in the cab is maybe you're going to lose a little bit of space for that radiator getting a little bigger. You may lose some configuration space. All doghouse tunnels go back so far. They're a little different in each design. Now that engine's changed a little bit, we could see some impact where maybe the two rear-facing seats that were traditionally behind the engine, they could get pushed back a hair further. So those kind of things are questions you're going to have to ask your specific manufacturer on how that's going to affect his cab design.
And that's like we said in the beginning, there are going to be questions that can't be answered here that are really, you're just going to have to ask the OEM when it comes around. And as we get closer, I'm sure there will be some other questions to be answered. Talked a little bit about seating there. Doesn't sound like it could be impacted, but we also have to worry about the NFPA requirements for that. So again, that's going to be something that as we get closer to it, we're going to know more. I wanted to move back to the pump panel area because this is, and I'm just speaking from the bits and pieces that I've heard. As we move back behind the cabin chassis, that might be where we see some changes as well. And I just wanted to see, because this is critical for like a pumper. When we talk about the pump panel, will any of that be impacted to the extent that plumbing could have to be really rethought with this?
It certainly could be. You've got your large after treatment device is located right in that general area typically. So how you mount your pump house, where you run your plumbing is all going to come into play. That also has a lot of heat generated in there. Now there's times where that helps us. When we get in a cold environment, that extra heat in the pump house is great. But there's also times where it can hurt us. So we've got to look to design around that. I wouldn't say that there's nothing earth-shattering coming here. Like someone's not going to tell you, oh, you can't get a certain size pump anymore, or you're limited to your number of discharges. But what you could see is a few more inches in that pump house to lengthen it so that we can fit everything in. You could also see that they may tell you your auxiliary suction on the driver's side. Maybe that has to move to the front of the panel where it used to be on the back side of the panel. Certain things like that could come into play. Again, it's going to be case-by-case basis, but it's definitely going to affect us in there, and we're going to have to plan around this.
What about now moving back a little bit more into the body? It sounds like the pump panel area and that maybe that first compartment or that area of the first compartment might be impacted. The other day I was thinking about this too, because whenever I've thought about this, I've thought about it in terms of pumpers. But then I was thinking, I was looking at my rescue truck down at the firehouse the other night, and that's a whole different compartment configuration when you get behind the cab. And if it's a rescue style compartment, obviously on a pumper, that's going to have a different configuration. So will there be any changes to the body that we might have to be thinking about?
It's certainly going to come into play, especially like you just mentioned. Typically with a pumper, a lot of that after treatment device is located in that pump house area, so we don't affect the body as much. If I keep the pump house tight, then I may lose some space in one of those front body compartments to accommodate the body properly. If I don't have a pump house, so I'm an aerial device that maybe doesn't have a pump, I'm a rescue that doesn't have a pump, well, now that after treatment falls right into that area. So that's where that front body compartment could get changed a little bit. The good news is, I think we're all used to DEF by now. So we all know how to use it. We know we have to add it. We know we have to keep it on the truck. Nothing changed there. The DEF itself didn't change. I don't believe, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe there's any changes to like the amount of DEF you're going to need or anything like that.
To be similar.
So we're not looking at larger tanks that we now have to accommodate. We should be good with I think typically they're about a 5-gallon tank now. We should be good with that type of setup. So yeah, minor changes, but nothing earth shattering again.
Can I go back to the pump panel real quick? Because I wasn't thinking about it until just now. Might there be some limitations on how narrow? Because a lot of work is done on rigs to make them to give them that sort of wheelbase. We always have to give it up somewhere. Sometimes it's the pump panel, sometimes it's compartmentation. But will there be some limitations on how narrow we can make them, or is it just a matter of you can go as narrow as you want, but it's going to have to go somewhere, so you're probably going to impact the compartment at that point versus the pump house?
I think the answer would be, like you just said, it's got to come from somewhere. Chris, maybe you can answer the question on, if I take today's engine and after treatment device, I know there's a minimum distance basically from the front of that engine to where my after treatment's going to end. Is that going to be similar, or is that going to get a little bit longer?
It'll be similar. The after treatment will increase. So today we are in a single can. All of the catalysts are in one big assembly. So we call it single module. For the new designs, we will have options on how to, we split it into 2 different cans. So the diesel oxidation catalyst and diesel particulate filter are in one can, and the twin SCR catalysts are in another can. So we've tried to give flexibility to manufacturers so that they can position those where they need to position them. But largely, many of the requirements will remain the same, like the distance of DEF injection systems, things like that will largely remain the same. So it's more a function of the size of the cans.
Okay, and it's just like we said from the start, Chris, it's got to come from somewhere. So there are different designs. If you go with a little bit of a longer layout and increase the wheelbase a little bit, then you're going to have more room in your pump house to fit certain things. But if you kind of stack things inside, you may get a shorter wheelbase, but then you may have to give something up in that pump house because now there's more components stacked on top of each other in there.
So we've been talking a lot about, the questions I've been asking are more theoretical at this point. We've been talking about, well, this could impact here. And I think it has given a pretty good idea of what will be coming. But the rubber's got to meet the road at some point. So Chris, are there engine mock-ups or any kind of anything available to manufacturers right now that they can use to start trying to lay this stuff out so that when 2027 gets here, they can hit the ground running?
Absolutely. So I'll just start by saying both of these new engine designs are already being produced for other emissions levels in other countries. So this isn't something that is just a wildly evolving piece. These are basically common short blocks with what's already in service. We've already field tested dozens of engines in dozens of applications, over 50,000 hours of dyno time. So we put our homework into the base design so that it doesn't change dramatically from what we've shared with OEMs over the past 2 years. So they've had CAD models for about 2 years. Most vehicle designs these days don't just start with dropping an engine and frame rails and then putting a body around it. Most of these manufacturers are very advanced. They use computer-aided design models. They drop things in. They see where interferences are. They can start to create components for when they put those designs in. And we already have OEMs that are installing prototypes. In fact, last week I saw a couple hundred pictures from one OEM and some of the very thoughtful work they did to package this. Cummins also works really closely with each one of the vehicle OEMs on an installation quality assessment. So that means we go through, we test, measure temperatures, vibrations. There's a lot of analytical work that goes into that to make sure that the engine is going to prove to be reliable and give the best level of service. And so we feel like we will be ready. In fact, the X15 will launch earlier than January of 2027. It will launch as early as April of 2026 from Cummins. And then it will be up to the vehicle manufacturers on how they stage their production process on what they can build and when. The X10 will actually, the last date we can lay a crank in a L9 engine is December 31st of 26. So both the the X10 and the B7.2 will start in January of 27.
So that's an important note that people need to. So really, at least on the Cummins side of the equation, there will be engines available that meet the new guidelines as early as 2026, and it's up to the OEM to. So you really so some of this onus does fall on the purchaser here to make sure that
Yes.
they're asking the right questions about the engines that they can, because one OEM might decide they're gonna cut it off at one point where another one might be going a little further. So it's an important distinction. Jason, what are you hearing? Anything there?
Very similar. The one thing that I think I would note is, what was the year, Chris Crowel, refresh my memory, what was the last emissions change year we had?
So generally about every 3 years. So we had one in 24, which was not a major emissions change. 2021, that's when we went to those single module after treatments. But to say when was like a very significant change when we first introduced after treatment, that was in 2007.
So one of the things that happened in the industry that some people may be aware of is, well after some of those changes, you would see fire apparatus being delivered with the old emissions, because a lot of the OEMs would go out and buy up a whole bunch of engines. The EPA has kind of cracked down this time and said, you're not going to do that. You're not going to buy a whole bunch of engines at the end of 26 and then build for the next few years on that and make it's an investment you're making to do that. But now it's not even a choice because they pretty much told me you can't do that.
Right. So what the regulations would say is you can build with the current engine model year. So forget vehicle model year, forget chassis model year, but you by 3 months after January 1, in the case of the X10, you can no longer install the previous model year engine. Now, there are some exceptions. People can request from the EPA, but it's a very limited number. Sometimes the EPA might grant that, sometimes they may not. But yeah, so you're right, Jason. There's a pretty hard stop at 3 months.
Now, Jason, Chris mentioned that he's already seen a number of mock-ups, I guess, of manufacturers trying to configure their cabs and chassis with the new engines. Are you hearing anything about what's happening now in the industry to prepare for this changeover?
Yeah, the OEMs are very much out in front of this. They've got models. Some of them have some physical mock-ups of things. So they're well ahead on their testing and their preparation for this. This is not going to catch anyone off guard, to put it mildly. But it does factor into the core things that we keep coming back to. Why do fire trucks keep getting more expensive? This is a great example of why. And it's nothing that anyone sitting on this call has done. It's regulation that we need to meet. And I know you both touched on it in the beginning. I think it's very important for our audience to know everyone, the IAFF, FAMA, everyone in the fire service fought very hard to try and get exemptions. And we always hear, why don't they just let the fire guys go and not make them use this new engine? These exemptions were denied. Basically, we were given the exemption for the critical thing. When you're in the middle of fighting a fire and saving someone's life, you can't have an engine derate. So yeah, we got that exemption. That was logical. That only made sense. But we did not get any exemptions that say we could use the old technology and not move forward. We are held to the same standards as everyone else in the industry.
All right, guys. Well, I want to thank you very much for joining me today to talk about this. Before I let you go, Jason, and then Chris as well. Jason, any final comments? Any general comments about what we've talked about today?
Just if you're buying a truck coming up and you know who's going to build it, ask them the questions. They will be able to give you the answers you need because they are going to vary from OEM to OEM slightly.
Chris, how about you? Any general comments about what we've talked about?
I think Jason hit the nail on the head that stay in contact. Now you know some of the questions, some of the things that Jason talked about, that you asked about, Chris. What effect does it have in my pump house? What effect might it have on my compartments? Will I sacrifice anything? We know that there are standards in place to protect things like seating width for operator and passenger. So those I would not be overly concerned with, but now you know some of those questions to ask.
And for sure, if anyone has questions that we didn't answer, if we can, send them to me, chris.mcloone@clarionevents.com, and I'll get them out to Jason or Chris to get you an answer on them if the answer is available. Again, we've still got about a year and a half here before everything does change over. So, there are a number of things that could come along. And as we get closer, there are going to be, the designs are going to be refined and we're going to know more and more. But I think if I could throw my 2 cents out there, it's just, and we touched on it a second ago, there is a big onus on the purchaser here to make sure that you stay up on this stuff, to make sure that as you're starting your journey, make sure you ask the questions so that you're not surprised when it comes up. I think I shouldn't say most everybody, but a good chunk of the fire service knows this is coming. It's been in the news for a while. Today we were trying to get some better answers to some of the questions that have come along, but really, when you're getting ready to place that order during that pre-construction conference, once you've selected your manufacturer, make sure you're asking these questions because it will, it'll impact maybe, it could be something very simple operationally that you wouldn't think about because now there's a little shelf in the compartment. Just prepare yourself for these things and ask what those impacts are going to be, if there are any. Who knows? We got a lot of smart people out there, a lot of smart engineers. They may end up saying, hey, we found the perfect solution to this, and there's not going to be any change. You're going to be able to go right along as usual. So there's a lot of engineering. What do they say? There's a lot. I was watching the basketball playoffs, and the Knicks were down 3-1, and some people were calling the series, and I was like, there's a lot more basketball to be played. Now it ended up the Knicks did lose, but I said there was a lot more basketball to be played. There's a lot more engineering to be done. We've got a lot of time to work on these things. So bottom line, make sure you ask the questions. So Jason and Chris, thanks again for sitting down with me today for this episode of FAMA Forum. All of our podcasts have been archived at fireapparatus.com/podcast. So if there's one you missed, you want to go back and see it, they are all there. They're also on our YouTube channel. They're on Facebook. So a lot of different opportunities for you to find them. If you can't find them, let me know. I'll find it for you. But as I said, regarding this, regarding the engines, if you have questions that we didn't answer, let me know. If you have questions about other things, any other topics, we've got a whole battery of subject matter experts that would love to come out and talk about the issue you're having with a fire truck or a design or something like that. So again, Chris, Jason, thank you for being with me here today. This has been Chris Mc Loone with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. Have a good one and stay safe. Thanks again, guys.